Greetings, everyone. Hope all of you are having an absolutely fantastic day. The Chinese Room has finally provided an extensive look at gameplay for Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2. As many of you already know, I am a big fan of the original game and definitely plan to track this game and do content for it once it comes out. So I figured I'd go ahead and do a video about the footage for all of you. First, a brief summary for those of you who have not been following the game. In Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2, you're going to play as Fire, an elder vampire who went to sleep in the Middle East centuries ago and now all of a sudden has woken up in Seattle with symbols all over her body, most especially one on her hand, which appears to be blocking many of her most powerful abilities. Now, Fire is nearly 100 years old. She's an elder vampire, and she's someone who has a reputation. There's a bit of a legend about her. So a lot of the characters that you meet are going to already have an idea about who she is, and you can kind of lean into that, or you could try to play her as a softer, kinder vampire if that is what you would prefer. The footage that's provided is an early game mission, and it's about you trying to figure out more information about the symbol on your hand. And Fire's clan in this footage is Bruja. Of course, depending upon what clan you choose, you're going to have different abilities. So playing as a Bruja, she is going to be much more combat focused. Keep in mind that you are able to choose the gender of your character if you wanted to, so you can play as a male, but the name Fire you are stuck with. All right, now that we've got that summary out the way, let's get into how I feel about the footage that we've seen so far, starting with what I like. I think combat looks great, to be honest with you. First and foremost, Fire is allowed to use some form of telekinesis, so you're able to pull enemies towards you, and you can pull up random objects in the environment. So they showed a sequence where Fire was standing on a ledge above an enemy and used telekinesis to pull the enemy towards her and then feed on them. I thought that looked absolutely fantastic and something that I would use all the time. There was also another sequence where she was trying to sneak up on an enemy, and she picked up a glass and then threw it at a wall to distract the foe so that she could sneak up on them and snap their neck. And again, I thought that was really, really nice. So seems like telekinesis can be used to add some additional layers to what you can do both in combat and outside of combat, because they did show one sequence where she used telekinesis not to pull an enemy all the way towards her, but basically to kind of yank it a little bit closer. And so seems like you have multiple situations where telekinesis can be used. I'm all about it. I think that's great stuff. Speaking of feeding, I think it's fantastic that you can feed both inside and out of combat. So if you get an enemy's health low enough, you can go ahead and just start feeding even in the middle of a bunch of enemies. Now, they might immediately start whacking on you as soon as that sequence is finished. But to me, it just adds to the feel of being a vampire. I'm in the middle of a bunch of humans. I've lost a little bit of blood. Why wouldn't I just tear out the throat of one of their friends so they can feel afraid and realize that starting this encounter with me was a really, really bad idea? So I think it works really well. Feeding not only heals some of your health, it'll also fill up the pips below your abilities, which allows you to use them again. So just all the way around, seems like there's a flow in combat where you want to be feeding on a regular basis. And it was mentioned during this gameplay presentation that you'll sometimes face enemies that have no blood, which will cause you to have to be very conservative in your power usage. So just all the way around between telekinesis and feeding and how you have to manage your power usage, seems like they really want to add some tactics into your gameplay. And definitely, I think it's a step in the right direction. They showed off some of the moves that you can do as a Bruja. So there's one option that allows you to punch enemies multiple times. It looks absolutely brutal, and it can actually be used on more than one enemy. Great stuff. And there's also a dash ability, which you can use defensively to give yourself some more space, or you can literally dash through enemies. And they showed a really nice section where the player jumped onto a high ledge to draw multiple enemies up at one time and then dash through all of them to destroy all of them with just one use of their power. Really, really cool stuff. Again, seems like tactics is going to be the name of the game to try to make sure you get the most out of every ability usage. My only reservation about all of this is considering the amount of effort they clearly put into combat and how heavily I feel like they're marketing combat. There's a question of, is this going to be a really, really combat heavy game? Is combat going to actually feel purposeful, or is it something where it's almost hack and slash to the detriment of some of the other features of the game that are frankly more important to me, such as conversation, good writing, well-told stories, things of that nature. We won't know that until we play it, but that's kind of my fear looking at where things are right now. But regardless, seems like combat in and of itself is going to be a good time. Another thing I really like about the footage is that the user interface looks very clean. For the most part, there aren't a ton of things on the screen that are distracting you. It looks to me like everything is in a place where it'll be very easy to immerse myself in the action while also keeping myself aware of when I'm on low health, when I don't have a particular ability available, things of that nature. The only thing I don't particularly care for about the interface are the blinking arrows. It would be nice if they are a little bit smaller, but at the end of the day, this is information that is helpful. Obviously, you want to know where the enemies are that are trying to attack you. And so I'm not really going to complain about that. But otherwise, again, I feel like this is clean, and I feel like they did a really good job not cluttering up the screen with a bunch of information you don't need to see at one time. I also think the lighting is fantastic in the footage that we've seen. In fact, the majority of this level is an illusion that's been cast by the Nosferatu you're going up against. And so that's why some of the areas look very, very odd. But I just feel like the purples, the reds, the different ways they try to use color in order to paint the environment, I think it works really, really well. And it makes me excited to see what are some of the weird, crazy areas we're going to experience throughout the game. Another piece of information that was dropped during this footage that I'm personally a fan of is that fire very quickly in this game becomes a sheriff, which is a high-ranking position within the Camarilla, and it causes you to be someone that other vampires, for the most part, have to respect and have to take heed of. And this just feeds into you being an elder, you being someone who already on some level is a legend. And I enjoy it because I feel like we get plenty of start from the bottom and slowly build yourself up, people treating you like trash the whole game until you finally become a person of respect, right? And so it'll be kind of different to play someone who right from the beginning is considered to be a noteworthy figure. And hopefully they're going to put together a story and writing and dialogue exchanges that'll really, really take advantage of that and allow us to start as a legendary figure and then build on that even further. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what a playthrough as a major figure in the Camarilla is actually going to feel like. On a similar note, you might have noticed in the footage that sometimes fire uses a special vision in order to see objects in the area, and that is Auspex, a vampire power that usually the Bruja would not have access to, but fire automatically gets access to this power just from being an elder. Again, this is something that I like. It feeds into, I'm a powerful Eldar vampire. I'm a step above most of the other people that I meet. One of the things I really didn't appreciate about Vampire the Masquerade Swan Song is that you were able to play as an Eldar vampire, but most of the time he was having trouble even convincing ghouls or humans to obey his commands, or frankly, even dealing with them in combat. It was really, really annoying for me and took me out of the immersion because in my mind, I was always like, he should absolutely be dealing with these kind of people, no problem. And so I appreciate these small additional buffs that Fire has received that most vampires would not have, because it just really establishes right from the start she's a cut above everybody else. And I'm hoping that's going to give us a unique playthrough. The only caveat I have about that is it definitely seems like the person playing in this game used all specs heavily, and I'm wondering if it's a situation where you're really going to need to have it on all the time. I loved the old Batman Arkham games, but one of the things that was kind of annoying is that you had to have detective mode on pretty much constantly, so you rarely saw the game as it was really meant to be seen. You were kind of always in that blue color palette. And so I'm wondering if you've got to spend Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 for the most part in the color palette of all specs. And is that going to really get annoying and take away from the game over time? We'll see. Another thing that I like about this footage is that it seems like you can potentially choose the wrong persuasion option. So there are multiple times where Fire is able to choose a specific option in order to be able to persuade the person she's talking to. And she can either go for a more aggressive route or for a nicer, more persuasive route. And it seems like different people will react better to different tactics. And I'm really curious about this because I want to know, are there builds that are focused more so on persuasion, or is this always going to be left up to your understanding of the personality of the person you're talking to? And then B, I'm also curious to find out, is it the type of game where you really just want to stick with the same type of persuasion options every single time, where it's probably best to either choose all intimidation or all more so persuasion? Or is it a situation where you're actually rewarded for switching back and forth depending on who you're talking to and trying to pick the best option for a particular conversation? Basically, it feels like it's possible to fail. Like the game doesn't really tell you, hey, this is what you should choose. It just lets you make your own decision about how you want to approach this dialogue, which leaves the possibility that you completely screw it up. I've said this before. I like when there's the option to fail in games. And so it at least appears like Bloodlines 2 is going to give me that. So definitely looking forward to what the full system looks like. And then the last thing I'll mention I enjoyed about this footage is that Bruja looks like it's really powerful. And they mentioned that it's designed around you chaining the different abilities together, whether it be your speed or the increased power or other things that you're going to get. And Bruja is definitely one of my favorite clans in Masquerade. So it'll probably be the one that I pick for my first run through. And it's really good that at least from a combat perspective, it seems to have been adapted really well. Each clan has a passive ability that they automatically activate whenever they feed. For Bruja, their fists start to glow and they get aggression that increases their damage. So that's why you see the glowing fist sometimes while they're punching. I think the effect looks really cool. I like the whole concept of I'm in the middle of a fight. I feed on one of my enemies. I get even more angry. I start punching harder and my whole body starts glowing. I think that's all great. I think that all flows really nice into a particular roleplay style. And again, summing all this up, this took effort. This doesn't look like they just slapped some stuff together and they're just trying to turn a quick buck. And this, to me, the things that I've listed show a developer that is at least attempting to provide the community with a quality game. And so all of that together, I do appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to this game more than I was at the end of the last trailer that they released. Despite all that, there's definitely some things about this footage that give me pause. So let's get into what I dislike. Starting with the fact that Fabian talks constantly. So Fire not only gets symbols all over her body, but there's a thin blood vampire who's trapped in her mind. And she is the only one who can hear him. Constantly throughout your adventure, he's going to be talking to you and having dialogue with Fire. In fact, they mentioned that by the end of the game, Fabian is the one who really kind of judges you as a person, depending upon how you've treated people, what kind of person you are, and how you've been developing your character. With all the other vampires you meet, you pretty much have the freedom to present yourself in any way you choose. But with Fabian, of course, since he's in your head, he sees everything about you. And so it's a way of the game giving reactivity to all the decisions that you make. So on the surface, that actually all sounds really cool and it could be really interesting. The problem is that one, Fabian's voice is boring. I think for a person that you have to hear pretty much constantly, a voice actor who was more interesting to listen to definitely should have been chosen. His dialogue is terrible from what I've seen thus far, from the standpoint of he's not saying anything that's relevant or interesting, and therefore it's annoying for him to talk and chime in all the time. But honestly, even more important than the things I've already listed, my real issue with this is that I think it impacts your ability to role play fire, because a lot of times Fabian is not just talking to you, Fire is talking back, and you're not able to choose the dialogue options that Fire uses when she's engaging in these discussions. Therefore, I saw multiple points where Fire gave a response, and I was like, that's really not consistent with the Fire character that I would want to role play. That's not how she would respond or what she would say. And so I feel like even though this is a game that is going to allow you to pick your own dialogue choices, the back and forth between Fire and Fabian is going to very easily take you out of the character. It's going to break your immersion. It's going to make you feel like Fire isn't really yours. And on some level, at least, I think that's a mistake. It'll be interesting to see whether or not the dialogue choices that you make during conversations with other vampires impacts the way that she engages with Fabian. So maybe if you're a character who depends more on intimidation and violence, that'll come out more. That's certainly possible, but right now I'm definitely not sold on this system, and I think it kind of takes away from the game. Since we're on the subject of poor writing, I think the writing is poor all the way around. From what I've seen, both in this presentation and in a previous gameplay presentation where Fire was talking with a different character, I just have not been impressed thus far with any of the dialogue, both between Fire and other vampires and Fire and Fabian. It just all seems very, very poorly written. And unfortunately, that gives me concerns over how well the story is written, even though I think the premise and the core of what they've presented here is really strong. I like the idea of playing as the elder vampire. I even like the idea of having a thin blood vampire who's stuck in our head, because I think that dynamic of the Eldar and the thin blood constantly having a dialogue about current vampire society could easily be really, really cool. But it's just from what I've seen thus far, it doesn't seem to be handled all that well. The character models also, in my opinion, look very poor. I am not impressed with the way the Nosferatu looks or the way that he's animated. The lip syncing is also off. It's very distracting when you have the audio and the mouths moving at the same time. Now, to be clear, that part I'm less worried about than the writing, because the character models and the lip syncing and the animations, all of that can improve before the game comes out. Whereas the writing, pretty sure that just is what it is. And hopefully we just so happen to be seeing some of the bad parts of the writing, but other parts of the narrative are going to be much more impactful. Another issue that I have with the game that I don't think is going to be fixed before the release, and frankly, I know everybody isn't going to agree with this, but I don't think the game currently feels particularly goth or punk, and I think that's a negative. The original Bloodlines had a very, very strong goth and punk feel, and it made it distinctive from a lot of the other types of games you would play. Bloodlines 2, of course, feels distinctive because you're a vampire roaming around in vampire society, right? So it has that going for it. But as far as that goth look and feel, it's completely lacking it. And therefore, I feel like the look of this game is much less distinctive than what we got before. And frankly, it's rather odd to me that they're showing footage of you playing as a Bruja, which is really supposed to be the most punk out of all the classes, and yet Fire's look doesn't scream punk at all in any way, shape, form, or fashion. And so I personally think that's disappointing and makes this game less distinctive. And I'm just not a fan of this more general look that I feel like Chinese Room seems to be going for. The last thing I'll mention that I don't like, and I think I've mentioned this before, I don't think Fire is all that engaging, to be honest with you. I don't think she's compelling as the lead person for this story. Take this with a grain of salt, because I might feel completely different when I get my hands on the character and I change it to a male, because the male will have a different voice. I'll change the way the character looks as well. So it's possible with a different look and a different voice, and me actually being able to directly control the character, I'll have a much greater appreciation for what Chinese Room has done. But from the outside looking in at this character, she comes off as very bland. I've already mentioned the writing is poor, so that doesn't really help her. And even more importantly, you're trying to tell me that this is an Eldar vampire, way older than anybody else she's coming in contact with. And yet when she speaks, I don't feel like that really comes across. It doesn't feel like I'm listening to someone who's the elder statesman of the group, to be honest with you. And so, again, I'm hoping some of these things will be cleared up over time before the game releases, and maybe that some of them will feel better once I'm actually in control of the character directly. But those are my reservations thus far. And that's it. That's my overall thoughts. So to kind of recap, I am still looking forward to this game. I'm really, really happy to see what they've done with combat. And while I'm not impressed with the writing I've seen for the narrative thus far, I am really happy about the ideas they have presented for the narrative. So you being a sheriff directly involved with the Camarilla, being an Eldar, having a thin blood that you're constantly in contact with. All of those things could be really, really cool. And even more importantly, they distinguish this game from the original Bloodlines. I give kudos to Chinese Room for trying to do something new, something different. They didn't just pull Bloodlines and then try to just do a remap of it and then give it to us as a game to try to turn a buck. It definitely appears that they're trying to give us a unique experience that is going to do some different things than what we experienced in the original Bloodlines game. I appreciate that, and I'm definitely looking forward to hopefully getting a quality game once this releases. We'll see. Hope all of you enjoyed this video. Take care.